The quiet breath of pre-dawn filled the small cottage, a cool, earthy dampness that clung to the rushes on the packed dirt floor. Within the shadowy embrace of wattle and daub, only the faintest sliver of light, a promise of coming day, pierced the crude opening that served as a window. On straw-filled sacks laid upon the ground, the family began to stir, a collective sigh escaping as they disentangled themselves from the shared warmth. From the central hearth, a faint, sweet tang of banked embers promised warmth. Ilara, her hands calloused but nimble, knelt by the ash-covered coals. With a practiced breath and a gentle stirring, she coaxed a flicker, then a tentative tongue of flame from the heart of the night's last fire. Soon, the dry kindling caught, and a thin thread of wood smoke, pungent and comforting, began its slow ascent towards the smoke hole in the thatched roof, a silent messenger to the awakening sky. The air, once heavy with the scent of unwashed wool and slumbering bodies, began to lighten with the rising warmth. Outside, a chorus of sleepy clucks from the small, feathered inhabitants under the eaves heralded the first true hint of day. Ilara's eldest, Theron, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, slipped out to check the handful of chickens, their soft murmurings a familiar comfort. He scattered a handful of grain, their pecking a gentle, rhythmic sound against the damp earth. The faint aroma of damp straw and new dung mingled with the burgeoning wood smoke, painting a picture of waking life. A deeper rumbling call then, a cow lowing softly from the byre attached to the cottage, beckoned his father, Cynric. But first, water. Ilara took up the heavy wooden bucket, its staves worn smooth by countless journeys. The path to the village well was a ribbon of churned earth, still cool beneath her bare feet. There, the creak of the well rope was already echoing in the quiet air, a melody joined by the hushed greetings of a neighbor or two, their breath misting in the chill. The water, drawn from the earth's cool heart, felt sharp and pure against her hands. Back in the cottage, the simple breakfast awaited. A thick, grayish pottage, remnants of last night's stew of oats and leeks, simmered gently over the now lively fire. They ate from wooden bowls, their fingers breaking off chunks of coarse, rye bread, sturdy and substantial. Small beer, brewed weak for all ages, washed down the meal, a humble libation against the morning chill. Each bite was slow, deliberate, a quiet communion of sustenance before the toil began. As the sun, still a pale, watery disk, began to lift above the ancient oaks at the edge of the common, the village stirred with purpose. The distant, mournful clang of the church bell, a single, solitary stroke, marked the turning of the first hour. Cynric, his tunic patched but clean, strode towards the communal fields, the heavy wooden plow already being hitched to the slow, steady ox. The rich, dark earth, still damp with dew, yielded reluctantly to the share, turning over in long, fragrant furrows. The scent of disturbed soil, fertile and promising, rose to meet the morning air. The rhythm of the plow was an ancient song, etched into the very bones of the land and its people. For hours he walked, one hand on the plow's stilt, the other guiding the beast, his gaze fixed on the endless horizon of furrows. The air was crisp, the sky a vast, indifferent canvas. The only sounds were the creak of wood, the lowing of the ox, and the constant, soft tearing of earth. Other figures dotted the expansive fields, bent over hoes, their movements a slow, persistent dance with the soil, weeding the nascent crops that promised the next harvest. Around midday, as the sun climbed higher and cast shorter shadows, a welcome pause settled over the fields. Ilara, having spent her morning tending the small garden plot behind the cottage, weeding diligently with her hands, brought out the midday meal. It was simpler than the mornings, often eaten where they stood or sat upon a fallen log. More thick pottage, perhaps a hard cheese, and always more bread. The air hummed with a quiet mastication, the shared silence of bodies replenishing strength, the brief, sweet respite before the cycle of toil began anew. The sun warmed their shoulders, a gentle hand pushing them onward through the long, slow arc of the day. The stillness that preceded the sun's full ascent was a balm, a soft hand laid upon the forehead of the waking world. It wasn't an empty quiet, but rather a profound, teeming silence, filled with the promise of light, the slow expansion of warmth. Each breath drawn in this nascent hour felt cleaner, richer, as if it carried the very essence of the earth's quiet dreaming. The air, crisp and cool against the skin, held the faint, sweet scent of damp soil and burgeoning green, a fragrance so subtle it might have been imagined, yet undeniably present. A solitary bird, perhaps an early robin, offered a tentative, liquid note from the dense foliage of the oak tree at the garden's edge. It was a sound that did not break the quiet but seemed, instead, to deepen it, weaving itself into the fabric of the pre-dawn hush. The world was still largely cast in shades of charcoal and deepest indigo, the contours of familiar things softened by the lingering twilight. The distant hills were merely suggestions, velvet humps against a sky that was slowly bleeding from slate to a faint, ethereal rose, a promise painting itself across the horizon. There was a unique beauty in this transition, a fleeting moment when the boundaries between night and day blurred into a tapestry of muted wonder. It was a time when hurried thoughts seemed to dissipate, leaving only a gentle awareness, a quiet acceptance of the world's unhurried turning. One could almost feel the planet rotating beneath one's feet, a vast, silent mechanism moving with an ancient, unwavering rhythm. This particular instant, poised between what had been and what was to come, invited a profound stillness within, a mirroring of the outer world's serene unfolding. Then, a thin sliver of gold appeared, a tentative brushstroke along the very rim of the world, igniting the clouds with a blush of apricot and coral. It grew, slowly, steadily, pushing back the last vestiges of the night. The dew on the grass, previously invisible, now caught the nascent light, transforming the lawn into a sparkling carpet, each blade tipped with a tiny, perfect diamond. A spider web, intricately spun between two rose bushes, became a glistening constellation, a testament to patient artistry revealed only by this gentle dawn. The warmth that followed was not sudden, but a gradual infusion, spreading through the air like honey in water. It kissed the skin, coaxing the muscles to relax, inviting a deeper sigh. Shadows began to sharpen, defined by the increasing light, retreating from their amorphous sprawl into crisp, understandable forms. The world, previously a monochrome sketch, began to fill with color, the greens of the leaves, the subtle reds of dormant buds, the earthen tones of the path beneath one's feet. Each hue seemed to emerge with a quiet dignity, revealing itself in its own time. This slow, deliberate unveiling was a lesson in patience, a gentle reminder that some of the greatest beauty lies not in sudden revelation, but in the quiet, persistent act of becoming. To witness such a morning was to feel oneself part of a larger, unhurried breath, a quiet participant in the grand, subtle symphony of existence. And in that feeling, there was a deep, sustaining peace, a quiet joy that settled in the heart, promising to linger throughout the day. The silence, once a mere absence, had ripened into a presence, a companion that settled in the spaces between the last breath of the wind and the gentle shift of light. It was no longer just the quiet of the room, but the quiet of the world outside, folding in upon itself, a vast, hushed intake of breath. The edges of the day, once crisp and defined, had softened to a diffuse glow, painting the distant hills in shades of muted lavender and deepest indigo. A single cloud, adrift and solitary, caught the dying embers of the sun, holding a fragile, peach-tinted light for a moment longer before surrendering to the encroaching twilight. There was a peculiar weight to this kind of fading light, not heavy or oppressive, but imbued with a tranquil gravity. It pulled the gaze outwards, across the slumbering landscape, and then inwards, into the quiet chambers of the mind. Thoughts, usually quick and darting, now moved with a languid grace, like slow-moving currents beneath a still surface. There was no urgency to grasp them, no need to pin them down, only to observe their gentle drift, their faint patterns as they surfaced and then receded. A sense of unhurriedness permeated everything, a silent agreement between the moment and the self that time could, for a while, simply unfurl without demand. The air, though unseen, held a palpable stillness, cool and breathable, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp soil and the distant, almost imperceptible fragrance of unseen blossoms. It was the scent of the evening exhaling, a slow release of the day's stored warmth. Occasionally, A single bird, perhaps a late wanderer, would offer a solitary, liquid note, a tiny ripple in the vast expanse of quietude, before it, too, surrendered to the general hush. These small sounds were not disruptions. Rather, they served to define the silence, like brushstrokes on a canvas of deep calm, accentuating its depth rather than breaking its spell. As the last sliver of the sun's promise vanished beyond the horizon, the world outside became a canvas of deepening charcoal and slate. Familiar forms receded into suggestions, their details dissolving into the gathering gloom. Trees became dark, skeletal sentinels against the paling sky, their branches like fine veins reaching towards the distant, nascent stars. The very act of seeing became an act of gentle imagination, of filling in the blanks with the soft hues of memory and the quiet certainty of shape. There was a comfort in this dissolution, a relinquishing of the sharp, demanding clarity of day for the tender, welcoming embrace of night. It was a feeling akin to floating, untethered from the usual anchors of schedule and expectation. The gentle pulse of the world, slowed to an almost imperceptible rhythm, became the dominant beat, synchronizing with one's own quiet breath. There was nothing to do, nowhere to be, but here, in this unfolding moment, witnessing the graceful transition. And in this gentle observation, a quiet strength began to gather, not forceful or demanding, but deep and resonant, like the profound calm of the earth itself, turning slowly, silently, through the vast expanse of the cosmos. The spirit simply settled, breathing with the evening, a soft and enduring peace. The quiet deepened as the sun began its languid descent, painting the western sky with a palette of soft, diffused hues. It was not a dramatic display of fiery oranges or passionate purples, but rather a slow, deliberate bleeding of pale gold into rose, a whisper of color across an endless canvas. Each breath felt fuller, less hurried, as if the air itself had grown heavier with the weight of impending stillness. The world seemed to hold its breath, not in anticipation of something grand, but in quiet reverence for the simple act of day giving way to twilight. Shadows, once sharp and defined, softened at their edges, stretching long and indistinct across the lawn, blurring the distinction between the sturdy oak and the waving blades of grass beneath it. They moved with an unhurried grace, like silent dancers performing an ancient ritual, drawing a veil of indigo over the vibrant greens of the afternoon. There was a profound comfort in this softening, a release from the stark clarity of midday, inviting the eye to wander, to lose itself in the gentle merging of form and shade. A faint breeze, almost imperceptible, stirred the leaves of the distant poplars, creating a barely audible shushing sound, a quiet murmur that seemed to belong to the very fabric of the evening. It was the kind of sound one almost had to strain to hear, a delicate counterpoint to the growing silence, a reminder that even in stillness, life continued its gentle, rhythmic pulse. This was the hour when the earth exhaled, releasing the warmth of the day in a series of lingering sighs. Inside, the light took on a golden, diffused quality, catching the dust motes that danced in the air like tiny, luminescent spirits. Each particle, otherwise invisible, became a fleeting star in this quiet domestic cosmos. There was no need for artificial illumination yet. The lingering natural light possessed a quality of profound tenderness, wrapping itself around familiar objects, softening their edges, lending them a momentary, almost ethereal glow. It invited introspection, a quiet turning inward that felt entirely natural, like the folding of a flower at dusk. The scent of damp earth, newly watered, began to rise, mingling with the subtle perfume of night-blooming jasmine that had just started to unfurl its petals. It was a humble fragrance, not overpowering, but rather a gentle suggestion of the earth's deep, enduring life, a quiet promise of renewal. This was the moment when the world shed its clamor, shedding the hurried pace of day for a slower, more deliberate rhythm. There was a peculiar solace in observing this quiet transition, a sense of belonging to something vast and ancient. It was not merely the passage of time, but a profound demonstration of cyclical peace, a lesson in letting go. Each moment unfolded without haste, without demand, simply existing, drawing one deeper into its placid embrace. The gentle fading was not an ending, but merely a preparation, a quiet turning of the page. One could feel the subtle shift in temperature, a cool caress against the skin, a delicate invitation to draw a blanket around the shoulders. It was a whisper of the night to come, not a chill, but a comforting reduction of the day's fervor. The world seemed to sigh, settling into its nightly slumber with a grace that human beings often struggle to emulate in their own hurried lives. This settling was a quiet art, perfected over eons. The distant chirp of a cricket, hesitant at first, then more confident, broke the silence with a delicate, rhythmic pulse. It was the first true voice of the approaching night, a tiny, persistent song that seemed to emerge from the very depths of the growing dusk. This small sound, so unassuming, only served to deepen the quiet that surrounded it, like a single note held against a vast, resonant silence. This was the time for quiet communion with oneself, for thoughts to drift and settle like autumn leaves on a placid pond. There was no urgency to resolve, no need to define. Only the gentle unfolding of the present moment, held loosely in the soft palm of the evening. It was a time for simply being, without the demands of doing, a profound and necessary pause in the continuous flow of life. The last vestiges of light clung to the highest branches, a faint, lingering blush of peach and lavender, before finally dissolving into the deepening cobalt. It was a final, tender farewell, a quiet benediction upon the fading day. And then, a softness descended, a complete immersion into the gentle, velvet embrace of early night, a silence so profound it felt like a presence. The world outside the low, earthen walls of the peasant's dwelling was quietly preparing for winter's long embrace. The sun, a pale coin in the vast, gray sky, dipped earlier each passing day, casting longer, fainter shadows across the communal fields. A damp chill, carrying the scent of turning earth and distant wood smoke, seeped into the very bones of the land, promising frost and the deep, silent sleep of the natural world. Inside the wattle and daub hut, where a small, smoky fire flickered on the central hearth, a different kind of quiet settled, the hush of weary expectation. Here, Ilara, her hands gnarled and strong from years of coaxing life from the stubborn soil, stirred a thin pottage in an iron pot. The simmering broth released faint whispers of kale and a few precious root vegetables, gathered before the last hard frost claimed them. Her gaze, though fixed on the bubbling contents, held the distant, inward-looking quality of someone counting invisible stores, assessing the scant promises of the past growing season. Her husband, Thomas, sat on a low, rough-hewn stool, his broad shoulders hunched. The day's chore of mending a worn hoe handle was finished, the tools laid by for another dawn. His mind, like Ilara's, was a ledger of what was, and what might be. The harvest had been gathered weeks ago, the collective effort of the village bending backs from sunup to sundown, pulling sustenance from the earth before the rains turned the furrows to mud. Each sheaf of wheat, each bushel of oats, had been winnowed, weighed, and divided. First, the Lord's portion, a silent, unyielding hunger itself, claimed its share, diminishing the pile with an inevitability as stark as winter's approach. Then, the tithe for the church, a spiritual levy on the earthly bounty. What remained was theirs, painstakingly stacked and guarded against damp and vermin, a fragile bulwark against the lean months to come. The air within the hut was thick with the faint scent of drying herbs hanging from the rafters, a desperate hope against the fevers and chills that winter often brought. Two small children, quiet as field mice, huddled close to the fire, finding comfort in its warmth and the shared breath of their family. Their soft murmurs were the only sounds, besides the gentle crackle of the embers and the low hum of the wind outside, a lullaby of the coming cold. This existence was a delicate balance, a constant dance with the seasons and the whims of nature. A summer drought, a torrential autumn, or a late spring frost could unravel months of toil, turning hope into gnawing fear. The strength of one's back, the calluses on one's hands, the unwavering willingness to rise before the sun and labor until dusk, these were the only currencies in a world where survival was a daily negotiation. There was little room for grand dreams, only the quiet, persistent wish for enough grain, enough warmth, enough health to see the spring return. As the last sliver of daylight vanished beyond the horizon, the hut plunged into a deeper dimness, illuminated only by the fire's gentle glow. Ilara served the thin pottage, each spoonful a precious warmth. It was a simple meal, a familiar ritual, observed not with joy, but with the quiet dignity of endurance. In this humble dwelling, as in thousands like it across the shadowed lands, life continued its slow, deliberate rhythm, a testament to the quiet strength required to simply exist when every day was a gentle, relentless test. The long night descended, bringing with it the promise of an even longer winter and the unending, silent vigilance of the medieval peasant. The last sliver of afternoon light stretched across the polished floorboards, painting the dust motes in the air with a fleeting, golden brilliance. A quiet sigh escaped her lips, not of sorrow, but of a deep, contented stillness that settled heavy and warm in the room, mirroring the slow descent of the sun. Outside, the world was beginning its gentle transition, shedding the sharp edges of midday. The vibrant green of the garden, so insistent in the full glare of the earlier hours, now softened to deeper, more contemplative shades. Each leaf, each delicate petal, seemed to drink in the waning light, holding it within its very fiber, preparing itself for the hushed quiet of the hours ahead, a silent, natural surrender. A gentle breeze, barely a whisper against the window pane, stirred the lace curtains at the open casement. They billowed inward, a soft, white breath carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp soil and the sweeter, elusive fragrance of distant honeysuckle. It was a scent that always evoked a particular kind of memory, not a sharp, specific incident from the past, but rather a diffuse feeling of countless childhood evenings, of fireflies blinking their Morse code in the encroaching twilight, and the low, murmuring voices of adults from a porch just out of sight. These recollections did not arrive with urgency, but rather drifted in like forgotten dandelion seeds on the same soft breeze, settling lightly upon the landscape of her mind before dissolving back into the quiet, constant hum of the present moment. She leaned back further into the worn embrace of the armchair, its familiar fabric softened by countless hours of quiet occupation. The book on her lap lay open, unread for several minutes now, its well-thumbed pages bearing the faint, almost invisible imprint of her thumb where she had last held it. There was no need to rush its narrative, no pressing demand for immediate attention. The story, much like the day itself, would unfold at its own measured pace, revealing its secrets only when the time felt intrinsically right. It felt profoundly right, this unhurried way of simply being, allowing thoughts to meander like a lazy river and emotions to simply exist, unexamined, like slow-moving clouds drifting across a vast, unblemished sky. The sounds from outside were muted now, softened by the gathering dusk, a distant, final bird call, the almost imperceptible rustle of leaves in the gentle current of air, the faint, faraway hum of a solitary car passing on a remote road. Even the steady tick-tock of the old grandfather clock in the hall seemed to slow its rhythm, becoming less a precise measurement of passing time and more a comforting, deeply resonant heartbeat for the quiet house. There was a unique and profound solace in this twilight hour, a feeling of being gently suspended between the day's diminishing activities and the night's promise of deeper rest. It was a liminal space, perfectly suited for quiet reflection, for the slow, internal unfolding of inner landscapes, where small, translucent insights might surface like smooth pebbles in a clear, tranquil stream, glimpsed only when the water is perfectly still. A profound warmth spread through her limbs, a gentle, welcome release of the day's subtle, accumulated tensions. Her shoulders relaxed, her jaw softened into a serene expression, and a quiet smile, almost imperceptible to an outside observer, touched the very corners of her lips. It was a smile born not of any specific, outward joy, but of a deep, pervasive sense of peace, an unspoken acknowledgement of the simple, unadorned beauty found in simply existing. The world outside would soon be completely cloaked in darkness, and the first tentative stars would begin their slow, majestic dance across the velvet canvas of the emerging night sky. But for now, in this luminous interim, there was only the soft, receding light, the gentle, quiet air, and the deep, abiding presence of an almost tangible calm. She closed her eyes for a fleeting moment, letting the gentle quietude envelop her completely, like a soft, comforting blanket woven from the very threads of peace and time. When she opened them again, the room had deepened perceptibly into shadow, but a soft, internal glow remained, emanating from somewhere deep within her, a quiet, unwavering beacon in the encroaching dusk. The faint tremor, then, continued its subtle course, not a jolt or a sudden alteration, but a barely perceptible lengthening of shadows, a deepening of the quiet. It was the kind of movement one discerns not with the eye alone, but with a deeper sense, an intuitive recognition of the world's ceaseless, gentle turning. The air, which had held a certain crispness hours before, now softened, carrying the distant, muted scent of damp earth and late-blooming things. There was no urgency in this transition, merely an unfolding, like the slow opening of a bloom whose petals unfurl with an exquisite deliberation, indifferent to the hurried rhythm of human moments. This unhurried shift in the light, the softening of the edges of the world, invited a similar softening within. The thoughts that had earlier felt distinct, like pebbles on a path, began to merge, their individual contours blurring into a smoother current. It was a pleasant dissolution, a surrender to the overarching harmony of the quiet hour. The mind, often a restless bird, found its perch, settling into a stillness that resonated with the burgeoning dusk. One could almost feel the weight of the day lifting, not with effort, but with a sigh of relief, allowing the spirit to float, unbound by the usual tethers of expectation or task. The subtle sounds that remained only underscored the enveloping silence. The distant murmur of leaves rustling as if whispering ancient secrets, the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the earth itself, a low frequency heard more with the bones than the ears. These were not intrusions but rather delicate brushstrokes on the canvas of stillness, offering texture to the quiet. They spoke of life continuing, of cycles turning, without clamor or demand, simply existing, breathing, and becoming. It fostered a deep sense of belonging, an understanding that one was merely a small, ephemeral part of this vast, gentle process, drifting along with its inexorable flow. To lean into such moments felt like coming home, a return to an essential state of being that often eludes one in the more active hours. It was a cultivation of patience, a teaching from the natural world itself on the virtue of allowing. One did not need to push or strive, but merely to observe, to feel, to let the world seep in without resistance. The boundaries between self and surroundings grew thin, permeable, allowing for a shared experience of the quietude. The coolness that began to gather in the air was not a chill, but a comforting embrace, a subtle promise of rest. And with this embrace, a deeper contemplation arose, not sharp or probing, but diffuse and pervasive. It was the understanding that much of what truly sustains us resides in these unadorned passages of time, in the spaces between words, between actions. The richness was in the pause, the deep breath, the gentle observation of light fading into shadow. These were the true accumulations, the quiet stores of resilience and peace, gathered like dew upon a leaf, glistening with the simple purity of being. One found, without searching, a profound sense of continuity, a quiet affirmation that even as one day drew to its close, another, equally soft and promising, would inevitably begin its own slow, gentle unfolding. The quiet persistence of light, even in its most diffused state, often speaks louder than any sudden, brilliant burst. It is in the lingering that true depth reveals itself, in the way a shadow lengthens across an old wooden floor, drawing out the grain, highlighting imperfections that were invisible under the noon's harsh scrutiny. There is a tenderness in this fading, a slow surrender that invites contemplation rather than demands attention. One finds oneself, almost without conscious decision, holding a breath, not in anticipation of something grand, but in reverence for the quiet unfolding of what already is. This is a space where the edges of thought soften, where the urgent clamor of the external world recedes into a distant hum, a barely perceptible tremor beneath the surface of profound stillness. The very air seems to thicken with an unhurried presence, inviting the mind to wander without destination, to trace the patterns of dust motes dancing in a stray shaft, or to follow the meandering path of a fly buzzing idly near the windowpane. In these moments, the ordinary becomes imbued with an extraordinary significance, not because it transforms into something else, but because it is finally seen, truly seen, for what it has always been, a part of the vast, intricate tapestry of being. One begins to notice the subtle shifts in the breath, the gentle rise and fall of the chest, a rhythm that mirrors the world outside, the tide ebbing, the leaves turning, the seasons cycling through their patient dance. There is no need for rush, no reward for haste. The most profound truths, it seems, are almost always whispered, discovered not by pursuit but by allowing oneself to be found by them, in the quietude that settles after all ambition has momentarily dissolved. It is in this unadorned state of simply being that the true texture of life reveals itself, layer by gentle layer, like the slow opening of a bloom that does not hurry its petals, knowing that its beauty resides in the unforced elegance of its own timing. The warmth that permeates these spaces is not always physical. Often, it is an internal glow, born of a quiet contentment that asks for nothing more than the present moment. It is the deep comfort of recognizing one's place within the larger flow, understanding that every minute detail, every fleeting thought, every silent observation contributes to the unique symphony of one's own existence. The gentle hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves against the pane, these do not disrupt the peace, but rather weave themselves into its fabric, enriching the silence with their subtle affirmations of life continuing, unfolding, breathing. There is a lesson here, perhaps, in the patient art of listening, not just with the ears, but with the entire self, to the nuanced vocabulary of the unsaid, the unspoken, the unseen. It is a slow, quiet pilgrimage into the heart of things, where hurried steps are clumsy and loud, and where only a gentle, open receptivity truly allows one to receive the delicate gifts that are perpetually offered. In such a state, the boundaries between the observer and the observed begin to blur, and one becomes, for a timeless moment, merely another part of the quiet, enduring, tender unfolding of the world. The wisdom found here is not sharp or declarative. It is a soft, pervasive knowing, like the lingering scent of rain on dry earth, a testament to what endures beyond the passing storm. Opening soundscape, distant, gentle bird song, rustling leaves, very faint, almost imperceptible murmur of a breeze. Welcome back, fellow travelers through time. Let the low sun warm your eyelids for a moment. Let the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke drift into your thoughts. We're still here, treading the well-worn paths of an era where life, for many, was a quiet, relentless turning of the seasons. A world, you might imagine, where every stone had a story, every shadow held a secret, and the unexplained often simply remained. It's in this landscape of humble certainties and vast unknowns that our next curiosity softly unfurls. Imagine, if you will, the gentle hum of summer in the village of Woolpit, nestled in the green heart of Suffolk, England. The year, a faint whisper in the chronicles, somewhere around the 12th century. Life, then, was rooted in the fields, in the rhythm of the sun and the patient growth of crops. The days were long, filled with the honest toil of reaping and sowing, gathering the earth's bounty. One day, so the hushed tales tell us, as the villagers, the reapers, moved through their fields, a strange sight met their eyes. Two small figures, children, were discovered near a wolf pit, a deep trench dug to ensnare wolves, a common sight then. They weren't like other children. Their skin, it was said, possessed a faint, unusual green hue. And their language? Utterly foreign, a melodic, unintelligible murmur that no one in Woolpit had ever heard. They were brought into the village, bewildered and silent. Food was offered, but they refused everything from the fresh bread to the hearty pottage. Only raw beans, it seemed, could tempt them, plucked from the stalk. Slowly, painstakingly, as the seasons turned, they began to adapt. The boy, sadly, faded, succumbing to illness before he could truly share his tale. But the girl, she lingered, and as her skin gradually shed its emerald tint, transforming into a more familiar shade, so too did her tongue loosen, slowly, to the language of the English countryside. Her story, as it finally emerged, was a whisper from another place. She spoke of a land, always twilight, where the sun never fully rose, only glowed softly like a distant star. A land where houses were built of stone, and people lived in a constant, gentle dusk. She spoke of a great noise that had disoriented them, leading them, somehow, through a cave or an opening, into the blinding, vibrant sunshine of Woolpit. A world, she implied, that was somehow underground or other. And there the tale largely rests. A quiet, unexplained tremor in the fabric of an otherwise ordinary, hard-working life. What was this twilight land? Was it a fanciful dream, born of confusion and a child's imagination? Was it some forgotten settlement, hidden by unusual geology, or perhaps a place known only in the deepest folklore? The green skin, a trick of the light, a rare pigment, or something else entirely? The questions linger, like the faint scent of rain on dry earth after a summer shower. For the medieval peasant, these were not matters for academic debate, but perhaps for quiet contemplation on a long evening, a gentle mystery tucked away with the harvest. A reminder that even in a world meticulously mapped by faith and tradition, there remained vast, uncharted territories of the unknown, just beyond the edge of the fields, waiting patiently in the quiet shadows. And sometimes, those shadows stepped out into the light, leaving only wonder in their wake. Closing soundscape, the faint sounds slowly fade, leaving silence. The light, already softened by the morning haze, seemed to hesitate at the window pane, reluctant to fully assert itself. It spilled into the room not as a bright, demanding flood, but as a gentle, diffused glow that dissolved the edges of objects and draped a luminous veil over everything it touched. Dust motes, caught in these languid beams, performed a slow, silent ballet, each particle an ephemeral star in a private, miniature cosmos. There was no urgency in their dance, no rush in the way the shadows slowly retreated, merely a quiet unfolding, a patient revelation of the world's quiet surfaces. The air itself felt hushed, carrying only the faintest whispers from beyond the glass. The distant, muted drone of a vehicle, the barely perceptible rustle of leaves stirred by an unseen breath of wind, these were not intrusions, but rather delicate brushstrokes on the canvas of stillness. They served only to deepen the profound sense of peace, to highlight the absence of clamor. Here, in this gentle quietude, the frantic pace of the outer world receded, became a distant echo that held no sway. The very notion of haste seemed absurd, an alien concept to this calm, unhurried space. Within this cocoon of gentle light and hushed air, time itself seemed to stretch and thin, losing its rigid structure. Minutes did not tick by. They simply were, like the soft, even rhythm of a sleeping heart. There was no past to regret, no future to anticipate with anxiety. Only the expansive, tender present, holding everything in its soft embrace. Each breath became a small, deliberate act of presence, a quiet acknowledgement of being, drawing in the calm and releasing any lingering tension, like breath on a cold window pane melting away into the vastness. Such moments invited a different kind of seeing, a deeper listening. The faint scent of damp earth and distant blooming jasmine drifted in, a subtle, evocative perfume that spoke of growth and the quiet persistence of life. The texture of a worn wooden surface beneath a hand felt immensely real, comforting in its solidity and the story of time it bore. One's own thoughts, usually a tumultuous river, became a still, clear pool, reflecting the gentle light without ripple or distortion. They floated by like detached clouds, observed with a tender detachment, neither clung to nor pushed away. There was a profound sense of rightness in this gentle slowing, a quiet validation of the unhurried. It was a space where small things became monumental, where the subtle shift of light on a wall held more meaning than any grand pronouncement. The very act of existing, simply existing within this soft frame, felt complete and sufficient. No external stimulus was required to fill a void, for there was no void, only a quiet fullness, a deep, resonant hum that emanated from the very core of stillness. This quiet unfolding was not an absence, but a presence of everything essential. It was a reminder that true richness often resides not in accumulation or speed, but in the spaciousness of calm, in the delicate dance of light and shadow, in the gentle rhythm of breath, and in the profound, unyielding peace that waits patiently within the heart of quiet moments. The world outside might surge and swirl, but here, in the heart of this gentle segment, an anchor of serene contemplation held fast, unwavering and utterly complete. The light, which had earlier painted the landscape with a vibrant clarity, now softened into a diffused gold, a mellow wash that seemed to invite the very air to hold its breath. It was not a sudden vanishing, but a slow, deliberate retreat, each ray a tender farewell to the day's insistent demands. A profound quiet began to settle, not absence of sound, but rather a gentle muting, where distant noises were absorbed into the growing stillness, their edges blurred, their impact lessened. The rustle of leaves, once a crisp whisper, became a silken sigh, almost imperceptible against the deeper hush that spread from horizon to horizon. This was the hour when the world seemed to unburden itself, shedding clamor, preparing for the deeper repose of night. Within this softening embrace, the smallest sounds gained new prominence, not distractions, but delicate brushstrokes on a vast canvas of silence. The distant call of a solitary bird, a melody woven thinly into the deepening twilight, carried a poignant sweetness, a momentary tremor in the otherwise seamless calm. The subtle shift of air, a breath so light it barely stirred, brought the faint, earthy fragrance of damp soil and the elusive sweetness of unseen blossoms, a blend that spoke of cycles and renewals. There was no urgency in these sensory arrivals, only a gentle offering, a quiet invitation to simply notice, to allow perceptions to drift like gentle tides. Time itself seemed to undergo a curious transformation in this liminal space. It no longer marched with the measured tread of a clock, but rather stretched and softened, becoming fluid, almost liquid. Moments were not discrete units to be counted or consumed, but rather vast, unhurried expanses into which one could sink, dissolving the rigid boundaries of past and future. The anxieties of what had been, or what might yet come, receded like shadows before the encroaching dusk, leaving only the tranquil reality of the present. This was the essence of true presence, not effortful, but a gentle falling into the very fabric of now, a relinquishing of control that brought an unexpected lightness. The old oak, standing sentinel at the edge of the field, seemed to absorb this quietude into its very being. Its gnarled branches, no longer etched in sharp relief against the bright sky, now dissolved into the hazy purples of the approaching evening, becoming less a distinct form and more an integrated part of the deepening shadow. One could almost feel the slow, steady pulse of its ancient life, a quiet testament to endurance and growth, mirroring the unhurried unfolding of the twilight hour. It did not strive or assert. It simply was a silent witness to the world's gentle descent into repose. This unhurried passing of the day instilled a deep sense of peace, a quiet acceptance that settled over the spirit like a soft blanket. There was nothing to chase, nothing to achieve, no destination. The gentle unfolding was the destination itself, each breath a quiet arrival. Worries, like the day's bright colors, began to fade, their intensity diminishing until they were mere whispers on the edge of awareness, easily released into the vast, accommodating stillness. It was a practice in surrender, not born of weakness, but of profound strength found in letting go, in trusting the natural rhythms that govern all things. The world outside, in its silent, graceful turning, offered a profound lesson in patience and harmony. The relentless striving, the constant pursuit of more, felt strangely distant, almost irrelevant, in the face of such simple, organic beauty. One was reminded that true abundance lay not in accumulation, but in the ability to simply be, to observe, to feel the gentle current of existence flowing. The quiet hum of life, barely audible, resonated deeply within, a reminder of an interconnectedness that transcended the surface of things, a quiet, reassuring presence. As the last vestiges of daylight softened into a deeper, more profound indigo, the air grew cooler, carrying a promise of renewal, of rest. The quiet deepened further, becoming a tangible presence, a vast, comforting embrace that invited one to simply drift, to exist without effort. There was no need for words, no need for thought, only the gentle, unhurried breath and the serene acceptance of the moment, a soft, sustained note in the symphony of the slowing world. The gentle descent continued, unhurried and full of grace, guiding all things towards a peaceful, encompassing stillness. The gentle hum of the old clock, a steady, patient rhythm against the deeper quiet of the afternoon, had long ceased to be a sound noticed, becoming instead a fundamental aspect of the air itself. It was a breathing sound, a soft pulse that underscored the stillness of the room, suggesting time was not rushing, but merely unfolding, petal by petal, at its own unhurried pace. The light, which had earlier spilled in a confident, bright rectangle across the polished floorboards, had now softened, diffusing through the sheer curtains with a milky, almost aqueous quality. It no longer defined sharp edges but rather blurred them, creating a comforting indistinctness at the periphery of vision. There was a peculiar solace in this fading light, a quiet invitation to retreat inward, to let the mind drift like motes of dust in a sunbeam. The book lay open on the lap, its pages still, its words waiting patiently. There was no urgency to turn them, no pressing need to absorb new narratives. Sometimes, the most profound stories unfolded not between the covers of a book, but in the silent spaces between breaths, in the slow unfurling of a remembered sensation. A faint warmth lingered in the palms, a residual imprint from the ceramic mug that had rested there moments before, its fragrant contents now settling in the stomach like a gentle warmth. It was the warmth of comfort, of simple, enduring things: steamed tea leaves, the smooth curve of earthenware, the familiar grain of the wooden table beneath the fingertips. These were anchors, small, unremarkable touchstones that grounded one to the present moment, to the unadorned beauty of simply being. Outside, the world continued its slow, inexorable turning, but here, within these walls, time seemed to fold back on itself, creating a pocket of serene suspension. One might perceive the whisper of wind through the eaves, or the distant, muffled sound of a bird's call, but these were not interruptions. Rather, they were subtle affirmations of life's continuity, gentle assurances that the world outside was just as it should be, allowing for this peaceful interlude. The air itself held a faint, almost imperceptible scent, perhaps the memory of old wood, or the faint, sweet perfume of drying herbs from a forgotten corner. It was a scent that hinted at long occupancy, at countless quiet moments lived within these same confines, by hands that had touched these same surfaces, eyes that had watched this same light change. There was a quiet companionship in this thought, a sense of belonging to a longer chain, to the gentle passage of generations. To simply sit, without expectation or demand, allowing the thoughts to unfurl like banners in a windless sky, was a profound luxury. There was no need to chase them, no compulsion to arrange them into neat logical sequences. They were free to drift, to coalesce and dissolve, like the clouds moving across a summer sky. This quiet surrender, this letting go of the need for purpose or immediate action, often revealed its own subtle purpose: a quiet replenishment of the spirit, a gentle recalibration of the inner compass. The silence deepened as the light grew softer still, transforming the room into a canvas of deepening shadows and muted tones. The world outside the window began to fade into a hazy, dreamlike blur, no longer demanding attention. All that remained was the quiet rhythm of the clock, the lingering warmth, and the vast, peaceful expanse of an afternoon gently folding into evening. It was a comfort, this slow descent, a quiet affirmation that some things, the most essential things, unfold with a beautiful, unhurried grace. Segment 4.1. The Unburdened Existence. While the vast majority of the medieval population knew the intimate embrace of the soil, the persistent chill of an unheated hovel, and the familiar pang of hunger, a remarkably different existence unfolded within the thick walls of manors and castles. This was a life not defined by subsistence, but by a distinct set of considerations: the careful maintenance of status, the acquisition of desirable goods, and the refined art of elegant consumption. To step into this realm was to enter a world apart, albeit one still bound by the era's limitations of hygiene and comfort, though these limitations were experienced with a considerable, cushioned remove. For the medieval elite, the morning sun, when it finally pierced the narrow, often unglazed windows, did not signal the immediate commencement of arduous labor. Instead, it might illuminate a private bedchamber, where a heavy, curtained bed offered a significant barrier against the pre-dawn cold. The rising of a lord or lady was an event accompanied by assistance. A servant might bring warmed water for a perfunctory washing, another might lay out the day's attire. The rough weave of the peasant's tunic gave way, for the elite, to the smoother drape of fine wool, often dyed in deep, expensive colors, occasionally lined with fur, or, for the most distinguished, the subtle rustle of silk brought from distant lands. The simple act of dressing became a ritual, a quiet declaration of one's station. Meals, too, marked a stark departure from the peasant's meager, often monotonous fare. For the elite, food was not merely sustenance but a display of wealth, power, and generosity. A typical day might involve 2 substantial meals, though the evening repast was often the grandest. The aroma of roasted fowl, perhaps venison from the lord's own forest, mingled with the pungency of garlic and the delicate scent of imported spices. Breads were of fine, white flour, a luxury unthinkable to those who subsisted on rough, dark rye. Dishes arrived in multiple courses, borne by a retinue of servants, and were consumed with a leisurely pace, often accompanied by ale or wine, the latter sometimes aged in the castle's own cellars. The anxiety of securing enough calories to survive was replaced by the more pleasant concern of whether the venison was sufficiently tender or the wine suitably mellow. The architecture of their lives further underscored this contrast. While the peasant's hovel offered minimal shelter, the castle or manor house was a fortress, a symbol of authority, and a hub of activity. Though grand halls could be drafty and private chambers still somewhat damp, the presence of multiple hearths, the warmth of tapestries hanging on stone walls, and the sheer volume of space offered a comfort unimaginable to the rural laborer. Latrines, while primitive by modern standards, offered a measure of privacy, and the daily presence of servants meant that chores like fire-stoking and water-hauling were never a direct personal burden. Their days were not without their own forms of labor, though these rarely involved the direct manipulation of recalcitrant earth or the strenuous hauling of water. Instead, their efforts might be directed towards the careful orchestration of a marriage alliance, the delicate negotiation of a land dispute, or the demanding task of overseeing a feast of many courses. There was the constant business of managing the estate through stewards, of receiving petitioners, or engaging in the complex dance of feudal politics. Leisure, too, was a curated experience. The thrill of the hunt, the strategic challenge of a game of chess, the quiet contemplation of an illuminated manuscript, or the simple enjoyment of music played by resident minstrels. These were activities that required time, resources, and an absence of the most pressing physical necessities, luxuries entirely inaccessible to the vast majority of their contemporaries. Their concerns, while real within their elevated sphere, revolved around maintaining an order, rather than simply maintaining life. The morning light, soft as spun silk, began to unfurl across the window pane. It didn't burst forth but rather bled slowly, tracing the delicate patterns of frost that still clung to the glass, remnants of the night's quiet chill. A pale, hesitant gold touched the polished wood of the sill, creeping like a shy creature across the worn floorboards, illuminating dust motes that danced in their own slow, silent ballet. There was no urgency in this dawn, only a patient unfolding, a gentle promise whispered against the retreating shadows. The air inside the room held the lingering scent of old paper and dried lavender, a comforting embrace that had settled deep into the very fabric of the curtains and the upholstered armchair by the hearth. A faint warmth began to radiate from the sleepy embers within the grate, a low, contented hum that spoke of a fire banked carefully hours before. Outside, beyond the thin pane of glass, the world was still largely hushed, held in that tender lull just before full awakening. A single bird, perhaps a robin, offered a tentative, liquid trill, then another, as if testing the clarity of the new day's air. The sound drifted in, unhurried, through a barely perceptible crack in the window frame, mingling with the soft exhalation of the house itself. Every creak of the old timbers, every sigh of the settling roof, contributed to a symphony of quietude, a gentle reassurance that all was well within these walls. The world outside seemed to breathe with a similar unhurried grace. Through the window, the garden lay steeped in dew, each blade of grass a tiny, glittering spear catching the nascent light. The broad leaves of the hostas, still unfurled from their tight morning curl, shimmered with a pearlescent sheen, reflecting the sky's delicate blush. Further out, the ancient oak, sentinel of the grounds, stood unwavering. Its branches, gnarled with countless seasons, were etched sharply against the brightening canvas of the sky, yet somehow, even in their starkness, they conveyed a sense of rooted peace, a quiet wisdom gathered over centuries of watching dawns like this one unfold. There was a profound comfort in this unhurried pace, in the way time seemed to stretch and soften, allowing moments to linger and deepen. It was a space where thoughts could drift like gossamer, unburdened by haste or expectation. The gentle quiet invited a turning inward, a soft communion with the simple beauty of existence. One could feel the slow, steady rhythm of the earth beneath, the unceasing, tender cycle of light giving way to shadow, and shadow yielding once more to light. This was not a world that demanded attention with loud shouts or sudden movements, but one that offered its profound truths in whispers, in the slow unfurling of a rosebud, or the patient return of the sun. To simply be, in such a place, at such a time, felt like a small, precious gift. The quiet persistence of the light, the soft murmur of the awakening world, the gentle warmth stealing across the room, all conspired to weave a tapestry of profound calm. It was a reminder that true richness often lay not in grand gestures or rapid change, but in the steady, gentle unfolding of each moment, observed with an open heart and a quiet mind. The morning deepened, not with a rush, but with an ever-softening glow, promising nothing more than another day of gentle being. The afternoon light, which had earlier held a brighter, more assertive quality, now began its slow, deliberate descent. It no longer spilled across the polished surface of the table with such clear intention, but rather diffused, softened at its edges, becoming something akin to liquid gold poured into the quiet corners of the room. A subtle transformation unfurled, almost imperceptible unless one surrendered fully to its patient unfolding. Dust motes, previously dancing with frantic energy in sunlit shafts, now seemed to slow their chaotic waltz, each tiny speck illuminated with a more gentle, languid glow as the light diminished its intensity. Outside the window, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the ancient oak, causing them to shiver and whisper in a language known only to the passing air and the rustling foliage. It was not a boisterous wind, but merely a sigh, a soft exhalation that carried with it the faint scent of damp earth and distant, unseen blossoms. The shadows, once crisp and sharply defined, began to stretch and blur, losing their rigid forms, melting into one another until the far end of the garden became a tapestry of indistinct shapes and deepening hues of green and gray. A lone bird, perhaps a thrush, offered a tentative, liquid call from within the dense canopy of the oak. Its song was not a declaration, but a question, a soft melodic inquiry into the quiet expanse of the fading day. Then silence again, profound and embracing, broken only by the almost imperceptible hum of the house settling, the soft click of timbers cooling, the gentle breath of the space itself. There was a comfort in this quietude, a balm for the spirit that sought stillness amidst the incessant hum of the world. The warmth that had lingered on the stone sill began to recede, giving way to a cool touch that was not unwelcome. It was a subtle signal of the shift, a quiet reminder that day was gracefully yielding its throne to the approaching twilight. The air inside the room, too, seemed to thicken, to take on a velvet quality, holding the residual warmth of the day in a soft embrace. One could almost feel the presence of the fading light, a gentle hand moving across the surfaces, smoothing the edges of reality. To simply sit, to observe this unfolding, required nothing more than a willingness to be present. No grand gesture, no hurried movement, just the quiet act of witnessing. The mind, often a restless wanderer, found a temporary anchor in these small, profound shifts. Thoughts floated in and out, unbidden and uninsisted upon, like the wisps of cloud that drifted across the sky earlier in the day, passing, changing, then dissolving into the vast blue. The colors outside continued their slow metamorphosis. The vibrant greens mellowed, taking on deeper, richer tones. Hints of blue began to bleed into the high western sky, promising the deeper indigo of the evening. It was a spectacle of patience, an artful demonstration of gradual transformation. There was no sudden jolt, no abrupt ending, just a seamless transition, a gentle ebb of light pulling away from the shores of the visible world, leaving behind a tranquil, muted landscape. This quiet retreat of the day felt like a profound secret being shared, a private moment between the light and the earth, and anyone fortunate enough to be observing. It was a reminder that beauty often resides not in the dramatic or the monumental, but in the tender, almost imperceptible unfolding of everyday moments. The very air seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching as the last vestiges of daylight withdrew, preparing the world for the softness of night and the quiet descent of stars. The air, though crisp with the lingering touch of night, carried a nascent warmth, a promise whispered by the faint, diffused light that now permeated the space. It was not a sudden, assertive brightness, but rather a gradual unfolding, like a scroll unfurling itself, revealing hues of palest rose and amber where the sky met the distant, softened horizon. The world outside, a tapestry of greens and browns, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the sun to fully crest the unseen ridge. Within this gentle dawn, a profound stillness settled, a quietude so complete it felt almost palpable, a soft blanket woven from the absence of sharp sound and hurried movement. The occasional distant call of an early bird, a single, tentative note, seemed only to deepen the quiet, like a ripple expanding across an undisturbed pool. It was a sound absorbed, rather than broken, by the vast expanse of the morning. There was no urgency here, no demand for immediate attention, only an invitation to simply be, to exist within the unfolding moment. The surface of the old wooden table, worn smooth by countless seasons and quiet hands, caught the indirect light, reflecting a muted sheen. Dust motes, tiny, ephemeral specks, danced in the soft beams that slanted through the window panes, each one a miniature cosmos, briefly illuminated before vanishing into the general air. Observing them was a meditative act, a small reminder of the constant, invisible motion that underlies even the most profound stillness. Their delicate ballet was a whisper of life, unassuming and transient, yet perfectly complete in its fleeting existence. A faint scent, earthy and damp, drifted from the potted fern in the corner, mingling subtly with the delicate fragrance of old paper from the shelves lining the adjacent wall. It was a smell of quiet growth and settled history, an aroma that spoke of patience and endurance. Each breath became a slow, deliberate act, drawing in these nuanced perfumes, allowing them to mingle and dissolve within, leaving a sense of quiet contentment in their wake. There was no need to name each element, no compulsion to categorize or analyze, simply to experience, to let the senses lead the way through this tapestry of gentle sensations. This was a space designed for quiet contemplation, a sanctuary where time seemed to slow, unspooling itself with a deliberate, unhurried grace. The minutes did not rush past, but rather lingered, stretching out, offering ample room for thoughts to form and dissolve, like clouds drifting across a summer sky. There was no pressure to hold onto any particular idea, no urgency to reach a conclusion. The mind was free to wander, to explore the quiet corners of memory or the vast landscapes of possibility, always knowing it could return to this central, anchoring stillness. Within this gentle current of being, a sense of profound peace took root, expanding softly from the core. It was not an ecstatic joy, nor a fleeting happiness, but a deeper, more enduring calm, akin to the quiet satisfaction of a well-tended garden. This was the peace that comes from surrendering to the present, from releasing the incessant pull of past regrets and future anxieties. It was a quiet affirmation of the simple act of existing, fully and completely, within the embrace of the unfolding day. Every soft breath felt like a reaffirmation of this gentle truth, an unspoken promise whispered on the morning air. And so, our journey across those vast, forgotten fields, under skies heavy with the drone of ceaseless labor, draws to a gentle close. We've walked where simple rhythms of life were bound by earth and Lord, where every sunrise brought the promise of toil, and every sunset, the solace of quiet rest. How much has truly changed, and how much endures, like the sturdy roots beneath the soil? The lords of the land may wear different guises now, their titles exchanged for the unseen forces that shape our modern world. The ceaseless drone of labor, once the creak of the plow or the rhythmic swing of the scythe, has transformed into the quiet hum of screens and the ceaseless flow of information. Yet, the human heart, its yearning for purpose, for sustenance, and for a gentle resting place after the day's striving, remains remarkably the same. The fields themselves may be paved over, or stand fallow under different skies, but the spirit of those who toiled there, their quiet resilience, their enduring hope, still echoes in the very ground we walk upon, and in the quiet pulse of our own lives. Thank you for walking alongside me, for listening with an open heart to this echo from the past. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred a quiet thought, perhaps consider leaving a like, subscribing to our channel, or sharing your reflections in the comments below. Your presence here means the world. Until our next tale, rest well. Dream gently of enduring spirits and quiet strengths. Come back tomorrow, for another story awaits.